สวัสดีค่ะทุกๆคนแนทนิโคลส์ค่ะนักจิตวิทยานักบำบัดสุราและยาเสพติดแล้วก็เรกิมาสเตอร์นะคะยินดีต้อนรับทุกๆคนเข้าสู่ Release and Heal Podcast ที่จะช่วยทำให้คุณเข้าใจตัวเองได้มากขึ้นผ่านทฤษฎีทางจิตวิทยาค่ะวันนี้ค่ะเราจะมาพูดถึงเรื่อง domestic violence หรือว่าภาษาไทยมันคือความรุนแรงในครอบครัวแต่วันนี้จะไม่ได้มาคนเดียวเพราะว่าแนทไม่ได้รู้เยอะขนาดนั้นคือเรารู้ เพราะว่าตอนที่เราเรียนที่อเมริกาเขามีคลาสไม่ได้เกี่ยวกับ domestic violence โดยตรงนะคะแต่เขามีคลาสที่เกี่ยวกับ trauma recovery แล้วก็มีการพูดถึง women and addiction men and addiction มันไปแตะเรื่อง trauma เรื่อง domestic violence เรื่อง intimate partner violence เยอะมากเลยค่ะมาเรียนที่นี่ก็เลยทำให้เปิดกว้างไม่ใช่คำว่าเปิดกว้างดิเปิดโลกในเรื่องนี้มากขึ้นนะคะ แต่อย่างที่บอกนั้นไม่ได้รู้เยอะขนาดนั้นเราก็เลยมีแขกรับเชิญ2คนค่ะคนแรกนะคะก็คือคุณยายของสามีนั่นเองค่ะคุณเกลนิโคลส์นะคะแล้วก็อีกท่านหนึ่งเป็นแม่สามีนั่นเองค่ะก็คือดรแอนเดรียนิโคลส์อยู่ดีๆลืมชื่อเฉยเลยเมื่อกี้บางคนอาจจะบอกว่าอ้าวนี่มันธุรกิจครอบครัวหรือเปล่าก็ประมาณนั้นนะคะพอดีว่าคนในครอบครัวมีความรู้ด้านนี้พอดีเราก็เลยแบบกริ๊งๆแบบว่า มัมยูมาเป็นแขกรับเชิญได้ไหมแล้วก็เดินลงไปหาคุณยายที่บ้านบอกว่ายูไออยากทำพอดคาสต์เรื่องเนี้ยมาเป็นแขกรับเชิญให้หน่อยทั้งสองคนก็ชอบมากเลยค่ะเขาแบบเขาเขาเป็นสายแบบว่า educator อยู่แล้วอะเพราะฉะนั้นเขาก็ตอบรับทันทีทีนี้ต้องเล่าแบ็กกราวด์เขาก่อนว่าเขามาจากไหนทำไมเขาถึงรู้เรื่องนี้เยอะนะคะคุณยายสามีนัทเนี่ยคุณเกลนิโคลส์เนี่ย เขาเคยเป็น advocate เขาเป็น domestic violence advocate ที่โรงพยาบาลแห่งหนึ่งในรัฐมิสซูรีในเซนต์หลุยส์นั่นแหละเอาจริงๆนะเนยจำไม่ได้เขาบอกแล้วแหละแต่เนยจำไม่ได้คือเขามีหน้าที่ในการเป็นเจ้าหน้าที่ให้ความรู้แล้วก็ให้การช่วยเหลือเบื้องต้นกับคนไข้ที่ประสบภัยความรุนแรงในครอบครัว หรือว่าความรุนแรงระหว่างคู่รักหรือว่าภาษาอังกฤษที่เมื่อกี้นัดพูดถึงคือ intimate partner violence นะคะเขาก็เลยจะมาแชร์ความรู้ในฐานะของ advocate ที่เขาเคย advocate ผู้ประสบภัยเหล่านี้นะคะแล้วก็มาเล่าให้ฟังว่าลักษณะของ domestic violence ที่เขาเห็นเนี่ยมันมีอย่างไรบ้างแล้วก็ฝั่งของดรแอนเดรียนิโคลส์แม่สามีของแนทเนี่ยเขาจบ PhD ด้าน criminology แล้วก็ปอโทด้าน sociology คือตอนนี้เขาเป็น professor เป็นศาสตราจารย์อยู่ที่ St. Louis Community College ค่ะ แล้วก็ที่ Washington University หรือว่าคนจะเรียกสั้นๆว่า WashU อยู่ที่ St. Louis Missouri เช่นกันค่ะ ซึ่งชีก็จะแม่นเรื่องสถิติค่ะ เพราะว่าเขาทำวิจัยด้วย คือจริงๆแล้วคุณแม่ทำวิจัยเรื่อง intimate partner stalking ด้วยนะ คือการสะกดรอยตามระหว่างคู่รักอะค่ะ แล้วก็เคยทำวิจัยเรื่อง domestic violence ด้วย แล้วก็มีเขียนหนังสือเกี่ยวกับอาชญาวิทยาแล้วก็ human trafficking ด้วยค่ะ เป็นหนังสือเรียนก็มีนะคะ แล้วก็หนังสืออ่านปกติก็มีอะค่ะ ใครสนใจก็ลองเอาชื่อเขาไปเซิร์ชได้นะคะดรแอนเดรียเจนิโคลส์ค่ะ ถามว่าทำไมเน็ตเป็นนักจิตแล้วเน็ตต้องไปสนใจเรื่องนี้ด้วย domestic violence กับ intimate partner violence มีผลอย่างมากกับสภาพจิตใจของคนคนหนึ่งค่ะ ลองนึกสภาพนะ เรากลับบ้านไปสมมุติที่พูดถึง domestic violence ก่อนนะ เรารู้ว่าถ้าเรากลับบ้านไปเราจะเห็นฉากคนตีกันในบ้านอะหรือว่าจะมีคนเคลี้ยงอะไรมาใส่เราอะบ้านเป็นที่ที่ไม่ปลอดภัยอีกต่อไปแล้วถ้าคุณเป็นเด็กที่โตมาแบบนั้นน่ะยูคิดว่ายูจะโตขึ้นมาแบบเป็นคนที่ซีเคียวหรือว่า anxiety ทำงานปกติไหมอะมันจะสร้างปมอะไรบ้างอะกับการที่เราต้องโตมาในสภาพแวดล้อมแบบนั้นหรือการที่คุณมีแฟนแล้วแฟนของคุณแก๊สไลต์ตลอดเวลาพูดจาด้อยค่าคุณตลอดเวลา การที่คุณโดนด้อยค่าไปเรื่อยๆไม่ว่าจะจากแฟนหรือว่าจากคนที่บ้านหรืออะไรอย่างเงี้ยมันสามารถทำให้คุณด้อยค่าตัวเองได้ในอัตโนมัตินะคะแล้วถ้าเราเป็นคนที่ self esteem ไม่ได้เยอะอยู่แล้วอะแล้วเราไปเจอคนพูดจาด้อยค่าตลอดอะค่ะมันอาจจะทำให้คุณอะไม่กล้าออกไปจากความสัมพันธ์หรือไม่กล้าออกไปทำงานในงานที่อยากทำไม่กล้าจะออกไปใช้ชีวิตอย่างที่อยากทำเพราะว่าไม่มั่นใจไง ไอ้สิ่งที่ฝ่ายหนึ่งเขาว่ามาค่ะสุดท้ายมันอาจจะเข้าไปคอนเฟิร์มความ self esteem น้อยของเราก็ได้ว่าสมมุติเรามองว่าเราอะเป็นคนไม่เก่งเลยไม่สวยเลยแล้วเราคิดอย่างนี้ไว้อยู่แล้วนะแล้วเหมือน แฟนเราหรือคนที่บ้านเราอะค่ะมาบอกว่าเธอแหละมันไม่สวยมันอาจจะไปคอนเฟิร์มข้างในแล้วทีเนี้ยเชื่อยาวเลยอย่างล่าสุดแนทดูซีรีส์เรื่อง Dynamite Kiss มันอาจจะดูไม่เกี่ยวเท่าไหร่นะมันมี intimate partner violence ระหว่างคุณพ่อกับคุณแม่ของพระเอกมันจะมีฉากที่เหมือนกับแบบเขาโดนสะบัดมือหรือแบบคุณแม่กลัวคุณพ่อมากอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะซึ่งอันนั้นมันก็เป็นหนึ่งสัญญาณที่บอกได้ว่าsomething is wrong หรือเปล่านะแต่ก็นั่นแหละมันทำให้คุณแม่ของพระเอกอะ self esteem ต่ำลงคือจริงๆนัทก็จะบอกว่าจะใช้คำว่าต่ำลงก็อาจจะไม่ถูกซะทั้งหมดเพราะว่าเน็ตก็ไม่รู้จริงๆว่าก่อนหน้าเนี้ยเขาเป็นคน self esteem ต่ำหรือเปล่าแต่ว่าถ้าดูจากเรื่องราวแล้วอะค่ะคือพ่อพระเอกเขาก็ไปมีคนอื่นอะเนาะมันก็อาจจะส่งผลกระทบแหละกับไอ้คนที่ยังอยู่ในความสัมพันธ์แบบส่งผลถึงความมั่นใจอะค่ะทีเนี้ยมันมีอยู่ฉากหนึ่งที่แม่พระเอกอะเขาไปบอกแม่นางเอกว่าเขาก็ไม่กล้าออกไปอยู่คนเดียวไม่รู้จะทำยังไงเหมือนกันแต่ก็รู้แหละว่าในความสัมพันธ์เนี้ยมันไม่ได้เพราะว่าเขาก็โดน abuse มาไงโดนจับตามองตลอดเวลาเหมือนถ้าเราสังเกตนะแม่พระเอกจะดูกลัวพ่อพระเอกมากเลยอะค่ะแล้วก็มีการสะบัดมืออะไรอย่างเงี้ยก็คือดูไม่น่ารักอะแต่ตอนหลังก็มีจุดเปลี่ยนไงเหมือน self esteem มากขึ้นมีความมั่นใจในตัวเองมากขึ้นเรื่อยๆเพราะว่าไอ้ความ self esteem ต่ำของแม่เขาจากการที่เขาโดน abuse มาหรือเขาจะเป็นคนที่ self esteem ต่ำอยู่แล้วเนี่ยมันไปส่งผลกับลูกชายไงเนยจะไม่พูดอะไรต่อจากนี้เพราะว่าเชื่อว่าหลายๆคนยังไม่ได้ดูเดี๋ยวมันจะสปอยแล้วมันจะไม่สนุกนะคะเรื่องนี้สนุกนะอันนี้นอกเรื่องคือเรื่องนี้สนุกมากเนยชอบมากคือมันเบาสมองดีแต่ถ้าจะดูให้หนักสมองก็คือวิเคราะห์แบบนั้นเนี่ยแหละค่ะ มันจะมีอีกพาร์ทหนึ่งที่นัทอยากพูดถึงคือผลกระทบของ domestic violence trauma แล้วก็ intimate partner violence กับสมองของเราค่ะเดี๋ยวนัทจะแนบไว้ตอนท้ายหลังจากที่นัทคุยกับคุณแม่แล้วก็คุณยายเสร็จเนาะเพราะตอนเนี้ยร่ายมายาวมากแล้ว ทีนี้แค่จะบอกว่าใช่ทั้งสองคนเป็นฝรั่งค่ะไม่ต้องกลัวคือตอนนี้มีแค่เสียงใช่ไหมเดี๋ยวมันจะมาเป็นภาพเพราะว่าแนทมีทำภาพไว้ด้วยแล้วก็แนททำซับเป็นภาษาไทยไว้นะคะไม่ต้องกลัวว่าจะหลงนะเพราะว่ามีแปลไว้ให้แล้วค่ะแต่มันก็จะมีบางคำที่แนทจะใช้สลับเป็นภาษาอังกฤษเพราะว่าภาษาไทยมันแปลไม่ได้นะอันนี้ก็ต้องขออภัยไว้ล่วงหน้าด้วยค่ะ Trigger warning นิดนึงค่ะ จะบอกไว้ก่อนว่าวันเนี้ย EP เราอ่ะจะไม่ได้พูดถึงแค่ความรุนแรงในครอบครัว มันจะไปถึงintimate partner violence abuse ในรูปแบบต่างๆ คือการละเมิดการทำร้ายกันในรูปแบบต่างๆ รวมไปถึงการข่มขืนการทำร้ายกันที่ไปถึงการสูญเสียชีวิตด้วยค่ะ เพราะถ้าคุณมีประสบการณ์ด้านนี้แล้วถ้าคุณรู้สึกว่าคุณยังไม่ไหวแนะนำว่าคุณอย่าเพิ่งฟังถึงแม้ว่าแนทก็อยากให้ทุกๆคนมาฟังก็ตามหรือว่าคุณบอกว่าโอเคฉันอยากจะไปต่อฟังสักหน่อยถ้าคุณไม่ไหวเริ่มรู้สึกว่ามันสะเทือนใจแล้วนะคะให้โทร1323สายด่วนกรมสุขภาพจิตทันทีค่ะ Can you help us define what domestic violence is?
Well, I'll start off and then you can elaborate.
Okay.
Basically, it's intimate partner violence would be harm that's emotional or physical or psychological that one partner, usually a male partner in most patriarchal societies, inflicts on a female partner. Although it can occur in same-sex partnerships, relationships as well.
So you're saying that it's interrelated between domestic violence and intimate partner violence?
Those two terms are really used pretty interchangeably here, unless that's changed in the last few years.
People do still use the terms interchangeably, but I think we've been leaning more towards use of intimate partner violence when you're talking about violence between partners. Domestic violence is sort of a broader term. It's more of an umbrella term, and it also includes other forms of family violence, such as like children who abuse their parents or parents who abuse their children or siblings who are abusing each other. So I think you can think of domestic violence as sort of the broader term, but when people do use the term domestic violence, usually they're talking about intimate partner violence. Yeah.
I got questions from my followers like the other week asking if sibling and sibling are considered domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it wasn't, and then you said yes, right?
Yeah, well, it does also vary from place to place, but I know in the U.S. under U.S. law that would be considered domestic violence. If you've got a sibling who's abusing another sibling in the household.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of abuse, you know, like we have so many types of abuse. And like last night, I did the research again, probably like 7 or 10. It depends on how you're going to categorize it. But for me, a lot of people in Thailand that I know, they don't know like how one's action turned to abuse.
Well, if it's a pattern, it's abuse. I mean, if this is something that's consistent in the relationship, it may be episodic, but if it happens over and over again, whether it's shouting, emotional abuse, or verbal abuse, or hitting, that's all abuse. If it's a pattern.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you've got repeated behaviors, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, economic abuse, sexual abuse, if it's a pattern of behavior, then it's an abusive relationship.
Is that economic abuse that you talk about? Is that financial abuse?
Yeah, so that would be like not allowing a partner to have access to like their bank accounts or not allowing that partner to have their name on their credit cards. It can also include things like purposefully destroying their partner's credit with the intent of making them dependent on the abuser. So an abuser can try to kind of financially destroy somebody or otherwise very stringently control them because it'll be much more difficult for that person to leave the relationship if they don't have access to finances.
I read one paper and then they even said that financial abuse would come out in a way where like you work but you never see your paycheck. Yeah, like it went somewhere all the time or you're not, like you said, like you don't have control over how you spend. But I see a lot of these behavior where the partner would ask their partner to quit their job.
Yes.
Does that happen a lot?
You know, you see that a lot, actually, especially after a woman starts having children. But even before then, sometimes it's because abuse is generally about power and control. They want to control the movements of their partner, what they do. And by not allowing them to work, it makes them more dependent on the abusive partner. And then when children come along, there's increased dependence with each child financially. And if the wife isn't allowed to work, she also can't leave because she isn't going to have a source of income. So that's another controlling factor.
And especially when children are involved, then the question is, well, how is that person going to be able to leave the relationship if they can't support themselves and their kids? So it's just a form of control that abusers use to try to keep that person in the relationship.
A lot of women fear that they're going to lose their kids if they leave, that the husband will get custody because he has a job and is making money, and she may not. She may be living in a shelter with a relative at the time, or she might be living in low-income housing, and you know, things like that she may worry would be held against her in terms of custody. So, and they may or may not, but those are the fears. They don't want to take the risk sometimes, you know, that's
true.
Pretty scary. Yeah, I mean, there are law firms that will do pro bono work for women who need to get away from an abusive partner, because some women aren't going to be able to afford a lawyer. Also, judges have been educated by domestic violence groups in the U.S., at least, regarding this as generally a male abuser problem with a female survivor or victim. And so that with most judges, that is going to make a difference in whether they will grant an order of protection. And it can be helpful for women. Some judges, it's very individual, so it may depend on the judge that you get. But there is a lot more awareness on the part of judges than there used to be.
At least there is more like awareness, you say, and more understanding and empathy towards this type of cases, I guess. So, well, back to the topic a little bit. What would you define verbal or emotional abuse?
I think for emotional abuse, it's always trying to undermine that person's self-esteem to make themselves feel bad about themselves. So, for example, I know someone who was in an abusive relationship and she had alopecia, which means that all of her hair fell out. She was very sensitive about it and she wore wigs, and her boyfriend would always say nobody else would want you, and he would call her names and would call her, like bald-headed and ugly, and nobody will ever want you but me. And he made her feel so bad about herself that she thought she could never have somebody else, which of course wasn't true. But that would be an example of emotional abuse, just really getting at whatever it is that bothers that person the most to make them feel insecure and what's the word I'm looking for? Just lowers their self-esteem, makes them feel bad about themselves and their own self-worth.
In Thai, I would say something like I would ask my client, like, do you feel like you're getting smaller every day?
That's a good way of
But
putting
like
it.
not physically smaller, but like your
course.
mental health. Like you don't have a say in things or something like that.
And even your world can get smaller because an abusive partner will also often try to isolate you from family and friends. And so your world really does get smaller and smaller. You have less support, less social network, that you can depend on if you do want to leave, or even if you just need some emotional support. Also, if there are kids involved, I worked with a woman who was a nurse at the hospital where I worked, and her partner, he was actually a minister at a church, and he would do things like he would turn the thermostat up really high, and then
like to make the house hot.
Yeah, and then he would say, "Oh, your mom is turning the heat up again," when the kids would complain, but she didn't do it. He would also do things like he would say he would pick the kids up from school, and then he wouldn't pick them up, and he'd tell her and the kids, "Well, your mom was supposed to pick you up. I guess she forgot. She's going crazy," or things like that. He made her look really bad in front of the kids whenever he could. And so that was problematic for her and for the kids. And actually, she wasn't sure if he was being abusive or not, because it was confusing, very confusing behavior to her. Outside of the home, he was very personable and friendly. He was a minister. Everybody in the community thought he was terrific. And so, but she was seeing another side of him, and he did a lot of other things too. He was verbally abusive in some of the ways that you were talking about. She was also the primary support for the family as a nurse. As a minister, he didn't make enough money to really support the family, but he would criticize her for not getting home in time to make supper when he wanted it, and was always criticizing her for something. And anyway, she did eventually leave him, but she really it was hard to do because she felt it would ruin his reputation in the community as a minister at the church. And after she left him, it did in fact affect his position as a minister. They asked him to leave. And
you probably blame her for that.
Yeah. And she ended up having to get an order of protection against him and so on. The women that I've talked with, generally, they don't want to hurt the abusive partner. They either want them back the way they were when they were really nice, or they want to leave them, but they don't want to hurt them.
Yeah.
And so it took her a long time to decide to do this. And I think it was ultimately seeing the confusion of her children and the changing relationships with them in the house made her finally decide she had to do something.
What are other abuse that people might not think is an abuse, but actually it's an abuse?
Well, I sometimes they'll withhold medications from people, but I think most people would recognize that as abuse. Sometimes too, an abusive partner will really keep tabs on everything that you do, where you go, what you say. One woman I worked with, when she got out of work, she had to call her husband, and then he would time her how long it took to get home to make sure she didn't go anywhere else. Also, he would text her or call her many times during the day to check on what she was doing and so on. Sometimes that could be interpreted as, wow, he really cares about me, he cares about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is probably the case with some people, but with others, it's more a way of keeping tabs on them and controlling what they do and where they go. She was very careful about that because of her partner's behavior. Or if it's, if the partner has a reason why he needs her to get home on time, maybe he's got to go to work or, do something. But if there's really no reason, if it's just, I want to make sure you came from work right home. And if it takes longer than they expect, then, well, where did you go? Who did you talk to?
Yeah.
And they'll tend to be suspicious that they're seeing somebody else.
Interrogation.
Or not believe them. And, let me check your phone or something like that. That would be a sign.
Yeah.
I think it's just like a pattern of behavior. And if your clients feel anxious, that they have to be home or they can't stop and get gas or that, this person's going to get upset because I'm a few minutes late. If it's such a pattern of behavior that they automatically feel like anxious about it, then that is a sign that it is abusive behavior.
There's a couple things I wanted to add.
Okay.
Just one is that there's I know that there are people who think that if their partner is jealous of them, that that's like a compliment, that they care about them so much that they're afraid they'll leave them and be with someone else. I think it's a red flag for something that could be wrong because often there's no reason for the jealousy. It seems to me more a way of controlling somebody's time and what they do, who they see, who they talk to, and trying to isolate them again. But that's something that I think is confusing to people. They sometimes see jealousy as caring, but it's really not from what I see.
And jealousy is a human emotion. All of us get jealous.
Right. True.
But I think like what you said, when that jealousy turns toxic or turns, like what you said, turns into controlling behaviors, then it becomes a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think sometimes people mistake for love or caring is, okay, if you are dating and you meet somebody and they move too fast and they shower you with love. They take you out to dinner. They're calling you all the time. They bring you flowers. If it's too much, too fast, just take a little time and look at that closer and see if there are other things involved, other controlling factors, because sometimes somebody will sweep you off your feet and, you think, oh, wow, he's crazy about me. But they may also be trying to get you into a relationship sooner than you're ready. They want to move in fast, get married quickly. Sometimes that happens and it works out, but it can be a red flag of problems ahead.
I would say that if you feel forced to do something, like your daily life or making big decision or even like having like intimacy, like sexual intimacy with somebody, and if you feel forced to do it, that's something to, I would say, proceed with caution.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say like, okay, go ahead, but like as a therapist, I cannot make decision for clients anyway, but I mean, that's something to think about.
Well, jealousy, isolation, quick involvement, controlling behavior. We've talked about those things. Verbal abuses, that target somebody's self-esteem. We've talked about that. You started to talk a little bit about like sex and sexual coercion and stuff like that. If it's clear that one partner doesn't really want to or isn't in the mood and that partner kind of pressures them into it anyway, that could be a sign, because that indicates that person doesn't respect the other person's boundaries and could potentially be a warning sign also.
I heard that in the US, if you hang out with somebody and then you ended up having sex with that person, and then in the morning you realize, oh, I didn't give this person a consent, you could call 911 and alert the police. I'm not sure if that's the case.
They were probably talking about like if a person is so intoxicated that they couldn't consent, and that person, well, it would be rape then if that person had sex with them and they were intoxicated and couldn't consent.
Is there a lot of victim blaming over here in the States?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah? It's common?
Oh, yes. Of rape cases that actually go into the legal system, only like 1% are ever prosecuted.
Really?
Yes.
Is it because the victim don't want to go through the process, or?
In part, yes.
Okay.
But then in court, they'll go through everything in that person's background. Oh, you were drinking, or oh, you wore this outfit, or well, you consented before. Yeah. You consented before, but now you're not consenting. They'll go through the person's sexual history. It's better than it used to be, but it remains quite problematic. Yes.
Okay, I thought it was just only Thailand.
Oh, no.
No.
Because I grew up, like, if you walk outside, you don't wear shorts, you're gonna get raped, or somebody will, like, look at you like that. And then I grew up being afraid of that. And then I realized one day, I was like, wait, why are we not educating men or just human in regardless of gender, that you don't sexualize other people's body.
Right. I mean, it has gotten a little better over many years,
Okay.
but it's still got a long way
Not
to
fast
go.
enough, right?
Right.
In a lot of places, not everywhere, of course, but as early as like middle school, we're doing a better job of educating children about consent and boundaries and healthy relationships and things like that. And so I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. When we talk about abuse, domestic violence, or intimate partner violence, or even intimate partner stalking, we often use the he or she, the gender. So I just want to know, like, from statistic point, does that happen to every gender?
In 6 years of, this is just from personal experience, but 6 years working in a hospital with hundreds, really, probably, of domestic violence survivors. I only spoke with 2 men who had been experiencing abuse. One was in a same-sex relationship. He was being abused by another man. The other one was in a straight relationship, and his wife had stabbed him in the chest. And I found that the dynamics were pretty similar in terms of he blamed himself for being stabbed, that his wife was stressed. A lot of the same things that a woman would do in that situation, that is blaming herself, thinking she'd done something wrong to deserve this, and that there were reasons or excuses for the partner to have done this. So those are the only 2 I came across, but I know that men often don't speak about those things either. I think partly out of this a patriarchal society setup, men are supposed to be the ones in control. So if they're being abused by a partner, they feel that makes them less. They don't want to admit it. Also, if they're in a same-sex relationship, same things and same-sex relationships are often looked down on or possibly even ridiculed by the police. They may not take it seriously. They may refuse to do a police report. So there are a lot of reasons why men don't come forward either. But I just read some statistics in the UK. I haven't read in the US. You may know them for the US better. But in the UK, it was like 73.5% of abused survivors, domestic violence partners, were women, and like 20-some%, the other bit was men. So I don't know. Do you know what it is in the U.S.?
Yeah. It's also important to note that statistics come from different places and it's measured in different ways. So what you'll often hear in the United States in organizations that talk about intimate partner violence, that 1 in 4 women will experience partner violence in her life, and 1 in 8 men will experience intimate partner violence at some point in his life. When domestic violence is measured, sometimes that includes like retaliatory battering. And so if a man is abused because somebody is acting in self-defense, then that might also count as mutual abuse. So she's abusing him, he's abusing her. So that's something that can come into play, but that works both ways also. There's also a researcher who wrote and studied pretty extensively about different types of violence related to the extent of violence. And so more severe intimate partner violence disproportionately impacts women. So intimate partner homicide is more likely to impact women. And then more severe injury also is the case with women who experience abuse. Globally speaking too, those percentages are going to look different in different places. I want to say there was a meta-analysis that was global. So they took research studies from all over the globe and analyzed it. And they found a pretty wide range of like 3 to 25% of men had experienced violence at some point in their lives. And then that number, I think, for women was like 23 to like 33 or 34%. So it will look different in different places, and then it also depends on how that's measured. There was another researcher who talked about what he called common couple violence, which it would include like sort of minor, more minor violence, like a slap or a shove, or sometimes even playful violence, like wrestling with your partner or doing like a little... That's me
and my husband.
Well, and a lot of couples do that, and of course, it's not violence in the way we think of it as being. It's not really violent. And so he said it's important to think about that when people are taking surveys and self-reporting violence, and the question is asked, "Have you ever shoved your partner?" Well, if you did this to Neo, and you said, "I think I have shoved him," then you would be tabulated as an abuser within those statistics. So it's pretty interesting. Like one of the earlier measurements, it was called the conflict tactics scale, and it's since been revised a bit, but it was criticized because they had pairs of couples and they asked them about their violence towards one another, but they didn't match up. So the way that one partner behaved towards another, like they would say something like, "Oh yeah, I was violent. I shoved, someone, or I did kind of like a, something like that."
I'd be confused.
But then the other partner said, "No, that I was not. I have never been shoved, and I've never been slapped." So they had trouble matching those pairs.
Why people don't leave abusive partners?
The biggest reason is because they love them.
Aw.
Yeah.
True.
And abusers have good characteristics as well as bad characteristics. Like we like to think of abusers as just being these horrible people all of the time.
Yeah.
But they, often, like you were talking about the minister in your example,
Right.
in public he could be very like outgoing and a
Yeah.
gregarious type that
Charismatic.
people liked. Yes,
Right.
charismatic.
Yeah.
That could be a part of it. They've got love for those good qualities. And they hope things will change. And so they keep returning, hoping that person will change. And sometimes they do, but usually they don't.
Right.
Do you want to add anything on that?
Why they don't leave?
Yeah.
Well, that is probably the number one reason, and I think women will try everything, before they finally say, well, I think I'm going to have to leave after all. They remember the person that they love and the good times that they do have, the times that he's been sweet. And so it's really, it is hard to leave. And then, as you said, it's hope that brings women back again and again. But eventually, often, for a lot of women, that will eventually dry up, that hope, they finally will give up on it. But then there are so many other obstacles to leaving. I think it depends on your socioeconomic class, partly because if you're wealthy or even middle class, like the nurse I was talking about before, she could afford to take care of her children, to put a roof over their heads and, provide for all their needs. And so she could afford a lawyer also. So for her, it was easier. For the wealthy, it's easier. But if you're in a lower socioeconomic group and you just don't have the money to leave, I mean, I'd say most women that I worked with had children, small children at home when they decided to leave. They hadn't worked for maybe 15 years. They maybe had a high school education and no further training. So as far as getting a job, they were already low in self-esteem, and now to have to go out and look for a job, they may not have very nice clothes. Their partner may not allow them much money to dress or anything like that. So financial concerns can be a huge factor. Job concerns, concerns about the children, custody and care of them. Also, of course, working in a hospital, I worked with women who had disabilities, and they depended on their abusive partner to maybe get their medications, to take them to doctor appointments. They might be in a wheelchair. To leave without someone to do those things for them is, how do you do that? And so they would sometimes choose to stay and tolerate the abusive behavior for those reasons.
That makes sense. So if you're a listener right now, but you're not experiencing domestic violence or you're not in that relationship, but you know that your friend is, how would we support your friend? Is there any suggestion from you two?
Definitely a non-judgmental demeanor and letting that person know that they have your unconditional support. Offering them a place to stay if they want it would be helpful, or simply asking them, what can I do for you, or how can I best support you, would be a good thing. I think the worst thing would be to be judgmental and expect that person to leave right at that moment, because that's going to further isolate that person. They're not going to feel comfortable, and then that cuts off a source of support. So trying to tell somebody what to do is not a good approach. Being judgmental is not a good approach. Trying to work with that person to meet their needs as they see it, in that time period, I think is a really good way of supporting somebody.
Maybe like help finding resources that they could go to. Yes.
I agree with everything that you said, of course. And I would just add that I think it's really important to respect someone who's experiencing intimate partner violence, to respect their own ability to be safe.
Mm.
I've, safety planning is always like a number one
Yeah.
thing when you're an advocate.
Yeah.
And I find most women already have made plans to stay
Yeah.
safe. And
Yeah.
they also know what their situation is better than anybody else
Yeah.
in terms of finances, education, children, and so on. And so just to really respect their ability to determine how their own life will look,
Yeah.
but to at least recognize if you see a problem, to not be afraid to say, you seem like something is wrong lately, because maybe
So
they haven't
voice
said
out,
anything
right?
yet. Yeah. And just say, is there anything I can do? Can I help? Are you okay? Those kinds of things to start with. And even
Yeah.
though she may not take you up on that initially, just offering it, eventually she may. And now you're
Yeah.
a point of support for that
Yeah.
person. The most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves. This is when the abusive partner is losing control,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want to lose control. So this is sometimes, if there's been no physical violence in the relationship, now it will happen. And I have seen situations where the abusive partner has killed the woman involved because she was leaving. That's why you just can't make these decisions for other people. You have
Yeah.
to let them determine. And some bad things are always going to happen, but
Yeah.
of course you want to do everything you can to not let that happen, to prevent the worst.
Yeah. So non-judgmental stance and also provide safety and consider the safety of your friend.
Right.
That would be the top
Right.
priority. Because like และนั่นก็คือทั้งหมดของบทสัมภาษณ์ค่ะที่แนทคุยกับคุณแม่และคุณยายนะ มันจะมีอีกอย่างหนึ่งที่แนทอยากพูดถึงที่แปะไว้ตั้งแต่แรกแหละก็คือผลกระทบของ domestic violence intimate partner violence แล้วก็ปมกับสมองของเรานะคะ มันจะมีสองส่วนที่โดนกระทบชัวร์ๆก็คืออะมิกดาลาแล้วก็ฮิปโปแคมปัสเลยอะมิกดาลาเป็นส่วนของสมองที่ทำหน้าที่เป็นตัวดักจับอันตราย แล้วมันก็จะบอกให้เราแบบเตรียมพร้อมอะว่าเราจะต้องทำยังไงสู้หรือหนีอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะ ทีเนี้ยการที่เราอยู่ในบ้านที่มันไม่มีความปลอดภัยหรือว่า relationship ที่มันไม่มีความปลอดภัยนานๆน่ะมันจะทำให้อะมิกดาลาโตขึ้นทีนี้โตขึ้นนั่นหมายความว่าไซเรนมันดังตลอดเวลาแน็กจะชอบเทียบอะมิกดาลาเวลามันทำงานเยอะอะค่ะมันจะเหมือนกับไซเรนเตือนแผ่นดินไหวเตือนน้ำท่วมเตือนภัยพิบัติอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะ ซึ่งเวลาที่มันดังอ่ะเราก็จะต้องเตรียมพร้อมใช่ไหมล่ะแบบจะเอายังไงต่อจะอพยพไหมจะทำอะไรไหมจะต้องแบบจัดการตัวยังไงทีเนี้ยพอมัน grow อ่ะเท่ากับมันทำงานตลอดเวลาหมายความว่าจริงๆแล้วคุณอยู่ในชีวิตประจำวันคุณก็น่าจะรู้สึกปลอดภัยได้เพราะว่าทุกวันนี้มันก็ไม่ได้มีอะไรเสี่ยงแต่ว่าเหมือนอะมิกดาลาของคุณมันทำงานเยอะอะมันทำให้คุณรู้สึกว่าคุณต้องปกป้องตัวเองตลอดเวลาเพราะฉะนั้น anxiety คุณอาจจะสูงก็ได้ ความกังวลเยอะทีเนี้ยมันก็จะไปส่งผลกับความสัมพันธ์ในปัจจุบันความสัมพันธ์ของคุณในวัยผู้ใหญ่หรือว่าการแบบจัดการงานอะไรสักอย่างอย่างเงี้ยค่ะมีผลหมดเลยแบบมีผลกับการใช้ชีวิตของคุณแน่นอนอ่ะอีกอย่างหนึ่งที่มีผลกระทบใช่ปะก็คือฮิปโปแคมปัสอันนี้คือหมายถึงส่วนในสมองที่มีผลกระทบจากปมมันนั้นนะคะ ฮิปโปแคมปัสมันเป็นสมองที่มันเกี่ยวกับความทรงจำอะและหลายคนที่โดน abuse มานานๆอะเขาจะมีสิ่งที่เรียกว่า fragmented memory คือความทรงจำเขาจะเหมือนแบบเทียบให้เห็นภาพนะเปิดหนังสืออะหน้าหนึ่งหน้าสองหน้าสามแล้วอยู่ดีๆไปหน้าสิบเลยมันขาดไปช่วงหนึ่งอะค่ะถ้าใครอยากหาข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมเรื่องนี้นะคะ Google มีค่ะ Google Scholar มีแน่นอนลอง type เข้าไปเลยค่ะ How Domestic Violence Affects Brain และนี่ก็คือทั้งหมดทั้งมวลของ EP นี้ค่ะ การทำ EP นี้สอนให้เรารู้ว่า การทำซับไตเติลยากมาก เพราะฉะนั้นถ้ารอบหน้าแขกรับเชิญจะเป็นฝรั่งเราจะต้องคิดดีๆก่อนว่าช่วงนั้นงานเยอะไหม เพราะถ้างานเยอะมันก็จะดีเลย์แล้วก็ไม่มีเวลาทำนะคะ อีกอย่างหนึ่งก็คือ ตอนที่พูดถึง Dynamite Kiss ช่วงแรกอะถ้าหลายๆคนจำได้นะมีความสุขมากเลยอะเหมือนรู้สึกว่าตัวเองพูดไปแล้วยิ้มไปเพราะฉะนั้นมันจะต้องมีเอพิโซดที่เกี่ยวกับซีรีส์เกาหลีและ mental health แล้วแต่ว่าเดี๋ยวดูอีกทีคือตอนแรกเนี่ยจะทำแค่ When Life Gives You Tangerine แค่แบบ1 เอพิโซดเต็มๆอะแต่ในแค่มองว่าเรื่องนั้นมันเครียดอะ เดี๋ยวต้องพูดหลายๆเรื่องรวมกันดีกว่าเพราะว่าแนทชอบหลายเรื่อง anyway ก็ขอบคุณมากๆเลยนะคะถ้าเกิดว่าแนทไม่ได้ลงEP ต่อไปภายในปีใหม่ก็จะ Merry Christmas แล้วก็ Happy New Year ล่วงหน้าเลยนะคะขอให้ปี2026เป็นปีที่ดีค่ะเลือกสิ่งดีๆเข้ามาในชีวิตรักตัวเองเยอะๆนะคะทุกคนวันนี้ไปและสวัสดีค่ะ